dear judges and dear viewers, my name is Sofiia Ovcharova. I study in Gymnasium Glob in Khabarovsky Krai, and today I would like to present my odborná činnost. And the name of my title is To What Extent Was Iran Able to Fulfill its Role as a Collective Barometer in the Korean War? I would like to start from my goals. My main goals were to find out whether the Iran was able to fulfill its role, which is the name of my work, as well as I wanted to focus on the development of United Nations during the Korean War, how the Korean War affected the future of United Nations, and last but not least, what problems and limitations it faced during the Korean War. The Korean War was the first major armed conflict in which the United Nations played a central role. It took place only 5 years after it was founded, hence it was still new and inexperienced, and the Korean War became a great test to see whether it was able to fulfill its role in the peacekeeping and security. History. After the Second World War II, the Korea was promised to become an independent state after being under Japanese rule for over decades. However, instead of becoming a unified state, it was divided along the 38 parallel. It was divided into North Korea, that was led by Kim Il-sung, and South Korea, that was led by Sigmund-Rhee, which was the new leader at the time. Both of those governments were rival and disagreed strongly with each other. However, after this, the North Korean forces invaded South Korea on the June 25th in 1950, which is officially marked as the first invasion of the South Korea. The United Nations immediately reacted to it. As the result, they believed it was a serious threat to international peace. As a result of that, they created the United Nations Command that was led at the United States. The President Harry Truman appointed the General Douglas MacArthur as the Supreme Commander of United Nations forces in the Korean War. The start of the Korean War was pretty successful for United Nations, especially the most important one was the Busan perimeter, in which the United Nations helped South Korea from collapsing, and later the fighting stabilized near the regional borders. After 3 years of fighting, the Korean armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, which ended the fighting. However, the war has never ended. Here you can see on this picture on this map the invasion of South Korea from the North Korea. It crossed the 38 parallel and later stabilized near the regional border, and after the Korean armistice was signed, it stabilized on the 38 parallel the way it is right now. Cause and perspectives of the Korean War. The Korean War was started as a civil war. However, it quickly turned into the Cold War with two states and different opinions. North Korea was strongly supported by the Soviet Union that was led by the Joseph Stalin. Meanwhile, South Korea was supported by democratic United States and United Nations. Both of the governments were rival, as I previously mentioned. And from the North perspective of view, they believed that they were threatened by the international interference, and they did not believe that it was a civil war between South and North Korea, but that it was the problem of United States. Meanwhile, South Korea and United Nations strongly believed that they were protecting themselves from the communism aggression. The President Truman even explained that interference of United Nations and United States was crucial in order to stop the communism aggression and to protect the international law. Involved powers. As previously mentioned, we know it quickly turned into the Cold War. North Korea, however, was not only supported by the Soviet Union, but later it was joined by the China that was led under Mao Zedong. And the reason why China joined was because the South Korean forces approached the Yellow River, and they believed that it was a serious threat to their country. Meanwhile, South Korea was supported by United Nations, and United Nations were able to unite 21 countries that were helping them with military help and humanitarian help. A few of those countries were Australia, Turkey, Canada, and United Kingdom. This shows that the United Nations is able to cooperate with different states. At the same time, it shows and illustrates us that it's not really able to work without powerful states. UN response to the outbreak. The nations believed that it was international international threat to the security and to the peacekeeping. Therefore, the Security Council adopted the Resolution 82, which stated that North Korean forces have to withdraw its forces from the borders of South Korea. And at the time, the Soviet Union was boycotting the Security Council, therefore could not use its veto. And due to this, the Security Council passed the Resolution 83, which stated that other states shall help South Korea militarily. It was the first major task for United Nations during the Korean War under the United Nations Charter. However, after the Soviet Union returned to the Security Council, it could use its veto, which limited the action of United Nations in helping the South Korea. Development and purpose of the United Nations. United Nations were founded in 1945 after the Second World War II instead of the League of Nations. Here you can see the sign of the League of Nations. This is what it looked like. And the reason why the United Nations were created was because they wanted to keep peace between countries, help cooperation between countries, and protect the human rights. In its early years, it was mainly focusing on diplomacy and the humanitarian help. It did not have its own military force. Yet the Korean force and the Korean War became a major task for United Nations to see whether it was able to use its peacekeeping and cooperation between different states. Effectiveness and limits. The United Nations authorized the Korean War as the first major conflict, as well as it gave its legitimacy to the South Korea and united a lot of different states in order to help it. It acted quickly and united a lot of states. However, it faced some limits, and those limits were that United Nations was heavily dependent on the United States making the strategic decisions, as well as the MacArthur's role was connecting the United States interests with the United Nations. And when China entered the war, it made it more dangerous, and the increase of danger increased a lot, which helped the United Nations now, because now it's more careful with the international conflicts. Conclusion. Ultimately, the United Nations were able partly to fulfill its role as a collective preventing the Korean War. It reacted quickly and cooperated a lot of different states, yet it faced some limits. And those limits were that it heavily depended on the powerful states. It did not have its own military force. And the Korean War became a turning point for United Nations to improve in their peacekeeping, crisis management, diplomacy, and other things that the United Nations is working right now. Last but not least, I would like to thank my mentor, Katarzyna Friedrichova, PhD doctor, who is a mentor and the assistant in the Masarykovo University on the FCC faculty. She helped me a lot with finding my work, and she gave me a lot of inspiration, as well as she allowed me to use different books, how to correctly work with the resources, and just giving me a lot of different advices how to make my work. And I also would like to thank my class teacher, Veronika Korecka, who helped me a lot with editing my presentations, helping me with this presentation that I'm presenting currently, and I really thank her. I would like to thank her for supporting me throughout my work. And thank you for your attention. I hope you really like my presentation. And here you can see the